What if the world's most marketed, like universally obsessed over pastime is actually just fundamentally overrated? I mean, imagine you were standing in front of a movie theater. There is this massive glowing poster for a new film, and the trailer has just been playing nonstop everywhere you look.
Yeah, on your phone, on billboards,
Yeah.
just woven into how people talk at the office.
Exactly. Everyone is telling you that this specific movie is the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. Like, it is guaranteed to change your life, cure a bad mood, and basically make you feel entirely complete as a person.
Right, so you buy a ticket, you invest the time, you sit down in the dark, and you wait for this grand revelation to just wash over you.
And then the movie starts, and it is just, well, it's fine, it's okay. I mean, maybe there are a few genuinely great scenes, but there are also some really weird, clunky parts. The pacing is off.
Yeah, and when the credits finally roll, you look around the theater, you kind of can't help but think, wait, is that all there is?
Did everyone else see a different movie, or am I just missing something here?
Right, and that creates a profound sense of cognitive dissonance.
Hmm.
There is this massive, unbridgeable gap between the utopian experience you were promised by the marketing
Yeah.
and the very grounded, somewhat messy reality you actually experienced.
And that gap is exactly what we are exploring today. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We are looking at a fascinating, highly provocative stack of research today.
It really is. It spans cultural critiques, evolutionary biology, and some pretty heavy philosophical texts.
Yeah, and they all converge on one argument, which is that sex is dangerously over-leveraged in modern society. Okay, let's unpack this
Right.
because we need to be clear right off the bat about what is actually being argued in these sources.
Right, that is a crucial distinction to make early on. The analysis here is not puritanical at all. Nobody in these sources is arguing that sex is inherently bad or evil or even unimportant.
Right, exactly.
What the research points to is the dangerous inflation of its importance. It is about how a fundamental biological function has sort of been mutated into a metric for human worth.
Yeah.
So if you are someone who loves stripping away the societal marketing to look at the raw biological and psychological data, you're going to find some serious aha moments in this breakdown.
Totally. Because to understand why something feels so overrated, we first have to establish what it is being rated against in the first place, right?
Oh, absolutely. Society has placed physical intimacy on this impossibly high cultural pedestal.
Right. It is treated as the ultimate currency. We are basically sold this idea of a seamless, high production value event. There's a fantastic term used in the sources to describe this modern phenomenon. They call it a digital hallucination.
A digital hallucination. That perfectly captures it.
Yeah.
Because it is entirely a hallucination constructed by the media environment we live in.
Yeah, from advertising that uses sexuality to sell everything from like car insurance to perfume.
Exactly. To the romanticized perfection of movies, to the absolute omnipresence of pornography.
Right.
All of these mediums depict an experience that is just entirely devoid of human friction. They set this unconscious expectation for athletic, endless marathons that are always spontaneous, always glamorous, and literally never awkward.
It is basically like looking at a highly edited, heavily filtered social media post. You know the exact kind I'm talking about.
do.
The lighting is perfect, the angle is flawless, the sunset is framed just right in the background. But what you don't see, what they intentionally, carefully crop out of the frame, is the reality of how they got that shot.
Yeah, the awkward posing.
Right. You don't see the mosquito bites or the fact that they tripped over a tree root right before snapping the picture. Our media culture completely crops out the behind the scenes of real-world intimacy.
And the logistical reality of human intimacy is fundamentally messy. It involves actual bodies, which means it inherently involves physical friction.
Exactly.
Real life requires logistical fumbling. There is miscommunication, physical discomfort, lubrication issues, limbs falling asleep.
Awkward noises, unpredictable smells.
Yes, all of that.
Yeah.
It requires a tremendous amount of real-time coordination between two human nervous systems. It is just human.
But because the overarching cultural narrative excludes all of that friction, people experience it and immediately internalize it as a personal failure.
Right. If your experience involves any of that normal human awkwardness, you just feel like you are doing it wrong. You feel defective.
Which is so sad, honestly.
It is. And that internal monologue fundamentally changes the act itself. This hypersexualized societal standard turns what should be a private, enjoyable, low-stakes experience into a performative chore.
A performative chore. Wow. Just the phrase sounds exhausting.
It really is exhausting. When you are constantly evaluating yourself against an impossible cinematic ideal, You generate massive amounts of performance anxiety.
Right.
The focus shifts entirely. You are no longer present in the moment, actually feeling what you are feeling. Instead, your brain is like hovering over the bed, acting as a director.
Trying to make sure you are looking the part and making the right sounds?
Exactly. And this performative pressure creates a terrible cycle of shame and insecurity.
It seems like that would completely erode any actual connection you were trying to build with the other person.
It strips away genuine enjoyment entirely. It turns intimacy into a test you have to pass to prove your worth. You aren't connecting with your partner. You are using your partner as a mirror to validate your own performance.
Wow. So we have this massive digital hallucination that sets us up for failure, making us feel inadequate when we encounter completely normal human friction.
Right.
Which naturally begs the question, if the reality is so often awkward and messy and stressful, why do we keep falling for the hype?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, why do we chase it so relentlessly, dedicating huge fractions of our lives, our money, and our mental energy to pursuing it?
For that answer, the sources say we have to look under the hood at our own evolutionary biology.
Here is where it gets really interesting, because reading through the biological breakdowns of how our brains handle arousal, it hit me. Evolutionary biology is essentially acting like a really shady, high-pressure salesperson.
I like that, a shady salesperson. Break that down a bit.
Okay, so think about the tactics. This biological salesperson promises you the absolute world. They knock on your door and tell you that if you just sign on the dotted line, all your existential problems will be solved.
Right.
Your life will be complete, you'll be blissfully happy forever, everything will finally make sense. They hype you up, get you completely intoxicated on the idea of the purchase.
And then,
But the exact second you sign the contract, the second the deal is closed, they vanish into thin air.
yep.
You are left standing there holding a product that requires a ton of maintenance, and you are looking around thinking, wait, where did all the magic go?
That is an incredibly accurate synthesis of the biological mechanisms at play here. Evolutionary biology does not care about your long-term personal fulfillment. It is entirely indifferent to your psychological happiness or your spiritual peace. Its only objective, its singular prime directive, is the survival of the species. It only cares about reproduction.
It just wants you to sign the contract so the species keeps going.
Exactly. And to guarantee that you sign that contract, nature floods your brain with a potent, highly manipulative neurochemical cocktail.
We are talking about massive surges of dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins, right?
Yes, this creates a state often referred to as the pre-nut fog. It is an intense, overwhelming state of anticipation and lust that heavily distorts your cognitive judgment.
It is important to understand how dopamine works here, right? Because we usually think of dopamine as the reward chemical, but that is not quite accurate based on the sources.
That is a vital distinction. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure. It is the chemical of motivation and anticipation. It artificially inflates the perceived value of an encounter before it happens, making the pursuit feel like the most vital life or death mission in the world. Your brain is quite literally tricking you into believing that acquiring this specific physical experience is the key to your ultimate happiness.
Which brings us to the 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. He makes a heavy appearance in this analysis, doesn't he?
He does. And he essentially described this exact neurochemical mechanism centuries before we had the brain imaging technology to prove it.
That is wild.
Schopenhauer framed this through the concept of the will to live. He viewed the universe as being driven by a blind, restless, irrational urge to simply exist and reproduce.
Okay.
And he argued that human beings are fundamentally arrogant to think our intellect is in charge. According to Schopenhauer, our intellect is just a servant to this blind evolutionary drive.
So the will to live actually uses our own desires against us.
Exactly. It tricks us into pursuing the grueling, resource-heavy task of reproduction by masking it as the ultimate personal pleasure.
It basically wraps a very heavy biological obligation in shiny, irresistible packaging.
And once the biological goal is met, that neurochemical cocktail drops off a cliff, the dopamine plummets.
Right.
Your brain experiences a sudden surge of prolactin, which actively suppresses dopamine and arousal. This creates a deeply jarring physiological crash.
The shady salesperson vanishes.
Exactly. Leaving you with what is formally called postcoital tristesse, postcoital sadness. The pre-nut fog suddenly clears, the romanticized distortion evaporates, and you are hit with this stark, sobering clarity.
Yeah.
The chemical high is gone, the illusion has shattered, and you are left in the quiet aftermath, confronting the reality of the situation. People are often asking that exact question, is that all there is?
It really is nature's ultimate bait and switch. The anticipation is biologically engineered to be far more intense and meaningful than the actual execution.
It is. And this raises a fascinating psychological question. If the biological high is so fleeting and the crash is so inevitable, how do human beings cope with that repeated letdown?
But wait, hold on. We are told constantly by almost every movie, song, and novel that physical intimacy is the ultimate cure for loneliness. It is how we find our other half, you know? Are you saying that is entirely backward? That we are just using it to cope with a biological crash?
That is perhaps the most pervasive myth we need to dismantle today, the intimacy misconception. Because of that biological letdown, humans try to make the act mean more than it actually does.
Okay.
We try to turn a physical function into a psychological tool, and in doing so, we consistently confuse sexual access with emotional intimacy.
Access versus intimacy, that is a massive distinction.
It is huge. You can have complete, unrestricted physical access to another human being without possessing a single shred of emotional intimacy with them.
Wow, yeah.
But society markets sex as this magical panacea for existential dread. We are sold the lie that if you feel isolated, if you feel empty, or if you feel disconnected from the world, engaging in a physical encounter will automatically bridge the gap between two souls.
But using a physical act as an emotional band-aid usually backfires, doesn't it?
It backfires terribly, because true emotional connection requires what psychologists refer to as the slow, boring work. It requires terrifying vulnerability. It requires sitting in silence with someone, having difficult conversations, consistently demonstrating reliability over years, and establishing deeply shared values.
And you just cannot shortcut that process with a physical act.
Exactly. If you enter into a sexual encounter, hoping it will cure your profound loneliness, and that foundation of slow, boring work isn't there, the act is going to feel structurally thin.
You are trying to build a house starting with the roof.
Yes. And when it inevitably collapses, you often leave the encounter feeling more hollow and more detached than before. The intense physical closeness only serves to brutally highlight the emotional distance between you and the other person.
That makes so much sense.
Long-term relational stability depends far more on that emotional intimacy than on sexual frequency. Sex can serve as a wonderful amplifier for a bond that already exists, but it cannot create a bond in a vacuum.
And when it fails to create that bond, people rarely blame the lack of emotional groundwork, right? They don't think, oh, we haven't done the slow, boring work of vulnerability.
No, never.
They just assume they need more sex or different sex or sex with a new person, which turns the act into a twisted kind of social currency.
That is the weaponization of intimacy. It becomes a status symbol. It transforms into a marker of success or tangible proof of attractiveness, especially when we look at traditional frameworks of masculinity.
Yeah.
The goal stops being a shared, intimate experience and becomes a conquest.
It is basically treating other human beings as high-score metrics in a video game.
Which feeds directly into toxic dating games. When intimacy is reduced to a performance for external validation, partners are chased like trophies to be displayed on an ego wall.
Right.
You aren't connecting with a human being with their own complex inner life. You are merely acquiring a metric to bolster your own self-worth. And relying on the physical validation of others is a tremendously fragile foundation for self-esteem.
Because the moment the validation starts, the ego crumbles. So let's look at the fallout of all this. If sex is an ineffective cure for loneliness, if it is driven by a fleeting biological trick designed by a shady evolutionary salesperson,
Right.
and if it is being warped by societal pressure into a stressful, status-driven performance, well, actually, scratch that. What is the actual cost to you, the listener, of spending so much of your life obsessing over it?
The cost is enormous. And it is primarily paid in the two most valuable resources you have, time and mental energy.
This brings us to the concept of the hedonic treadmill, right? Because sex is such a high dopamine activity, it is subject to the ruthless neurological law of diminishing returns.
Let's explain how that works in the brain. When you spike your dopamine to unnatural levels repeatedly, your brain tries to protect itself by downregulating its dopamine receptors.
It essentially turns down the volume.
Yes.
So if you are using this as your primary source of meaning or happiness, you inevitably build a tolerance. You need constant escalation. You need more variety, higher intensity, or greater frequency just to hit the exact same baseline of satisfaction you used to get easily.
Right. You are running on a treadmill, sprinting as fast as you can, burning all this energy, but you aren't actually moving forward.
And the sheer logistics of staying on that treadmill create a massive, undeniable time sink.
The time sink is staggering when you actually calculate it.
Right. Think about the mental bandwidth required for the chase in modern society. You are endlessly swiping on dating apps, crafting the perfect text messages, coordinating logistical meetups.
And managing the inevitable emotional drama, the ghosting, the sting of rejection.
Not to mention the practical, real-world risks involved, like managing the threat of STDs or the life-altering potential of unplanned pregnancy.
It is a phenomenal amount of cognitive and emotional energy devoted to a return on investment that, biologically, only lasts a few minutes.
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the concept of the deep life becomes absolutely vital.
I love this part of the analysis because it offers a real alternative.
We have to contrast the structurally thin nature of fleeting sexual encounters with the durable, tranquil satisfaction of alternative fulfillments.
Right.
When you are pouring the majority of your daily mental energy into the pursuit of sexual validation or maintaining the hedonic treadmill, you are incurring a massive opportunity cost. You are draining focus and energy that could be invested in deep life achievements.
We are talking about pursuits that actually build a profound sense of self, like entering a state of deep creative flow, building profound platonic friendships that last decades.
Yes, fostering intellectual connections, pushing your body through physical exercise, or dedicating yourself to mastering a difficult craft.
These alternative fulfillments provide a stable, long-lasting identity. They build a legacy.
Exactly. The deep satisfaction you get from finally mastering a complex piece of music or the comfort of a 10-year friendship, it doesn't evaporate the moment a neurochemical drops off.
Right.
It is durable. It stays with you. And yet these pursuits get a mere fraction of the cultural airtime that sex does.
Because, frankly, you can't easily sell a sports car, a luxury watch, or a new fragrance by marketing the slow, boring work of mastering a craft.
Precisely.
The cultural hype around sex is ultimately an economic engine. It is designed to keep you feeling inadequate, so you keep buying things to make yourself more desirable.
The societal narrative is so loud that we often mistake it for a universal biological mandate. But to prove just how manufactured this cultural hype really is, the sources suggest we look at the perspectives of the asexual community, as well as individuals with naturally low libidos.
They act as the ultimate control group in this sociological experiment. If you identify as asexual, this entire omnipresent cultural obsession with sexual acquisition is completely disconnected from your lived reality.
And their existence proves that this heavily marketed pastime is absolutely not a universal requirement for human happiness or completeness.
Right.
Asexual individuals and those whose libidos naturally fluctuate due to stress, health, age, or just their baseline disposition live incredibly rich, fulfilled, deeply connected lives.
Their reality actively debunks the toxic societal myth that you must have frequent, mind-blowing sex to be a healthy, whole person.
Exactly. They find their meaning in those durable, deep life pursuits. They prove that the biological drive to reproduce is just one single option on the vast human menu, not the mandatory main course.
So what does this all mean for you? We have navigated through the media's flawless digital hallucinations, the high-pressure sales tactics of our own evolutionary neurochemistry, and the exhausting reality of the hedonic treadmill.
The consensus across the biology, the philosophy, and the psychology is very clear here. Sex isn't bad. When it is grounded in mutual respect, actual emotional safety, and genuine vulnerability, it is a wonderful way to bond with a partner and relieve stress.
Right.
But it is dangerously, profoundly over-leveraged.
Over-leveraged. We are asking it to do a massive job it was never designed for.
We are taking a temporary biological function and asking it to serve as a replacement for life purpose. We are asking it to be a magic panacea for our deep emotional voids, our insecurities, and our existential dread.
And it is fundamentally, mechanically unequipped to carry that kind of psychological weight.
Yes. When the research says sex is overrated, it's just using a relative term.
Right.
It simply means the cultural hype drastically exceeds the actual practical utility of the act.
So the goal of all this analysis isn't to banish it from your life, but to right-size it, to put it in its proper perspective.
Lower the pedestal that society has placed it on. Shift your perspective away from getting sex, like acquiring a high score or a trophy, and move toward experiencing intimacy.
Yeah.
Redefine what a successful relationship looks like for you. Base that success on shared values, deep trust, and honest communication, rather than on cinematic performance or weekly frequency metrics.
Right.
When you finally stop asking sex to solve your deepest emotional problems, you actually free yourself to enjoy it for exactly what it is, without the crushing weight of impossible expectations.
And when you drop those impossible expectations, it frees up a massive amount of mental space for other things. Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Think back to that movie theater we talked about at the very beginning. You bought the ticket, you watched the heavily hyped trailer, you sat through the clunky, somewhat awkward reality of the film.
Right.
But imagine for a second that you didn't buy the ticket. Think about how much of your daily mental bandwidth is currently occupied by the relentless noise of sexual marketing, the exhausting pursuit of external validation, or the endless maintenance of relationship drama.
That's a lot.
If you could magically reclaim all of that mental energy, gather it all up, and redirect it with laser focus for just 30 days, what deep life achievement could you finally bring into reality?
That's a great question.
What creative masterpiece could you write? What complex new skill could you master? Or what profound intellectual pursuit could you build if you stepped off the hedonic treadmill and actually started running your own race? It is a question worth asking yourself today.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.